She wore silk to school, but felt like someone in rags. Everyone assumed she had every advantage, but every mirror she faced returned the same verdict. She was alone. At 17, Isabella carried the weight of a name that opened doors and closed conversations. At home, there were marble floors and a driver at the gate, but in the classroom, she felt invisible in a way no wealth could fix. On the morning a voice over the loudspeaker announced test results, the paper in her hand blurred into a smear of ink that read like a sentence. Her classmates leaned back in chairs. The fluorescent lights made their laughter slick. The report card the school emailed to her parents arrived like an accusation, a list of zeros that sounded louder than any alarm. She had everything publicly and nothing privately. Then she met someone who looked exactly like her, sitting on a bench outside the art room, paint under her nails and a scuffed notebook that matched Isabella's handwriting in the most unsettling way. How could two lives be the same and worlds apart? Isabella was 17, raised in a neighborhood where cabs waited and names mattered. She went to a private academy with rows of framed alumni and an honor board that never had her name. Her father, Marcus, ran an investment firm, and her mother, Elena, curated charity galas. They gave her tutors, summer programs, and expectations that fit like a tailored suit. Yet the real seams of her life were frayed. She learned to walk softly so the house would not seem empty, to sit through dinners where conversation was about portfolios and philanthropy, to smile when strangers praised her lineage. School felt harder because every mistake was amplified. It was not just a bad grade, it became proof someone had failed the family. In that pressure, Isabella hid a small, stubborn truth. She loved to draw maps of ideas, scribbles of stories, and comic panels that no one in the living room noticed. Those sketches were private rebellions, a secret geography of who she might be if the name on her birth certificate were not the map everyone used. She believed herself an only child in a world that required singular narratives, until the afternoon she found a girl with the same jawline, the same habitual tilt of the head, painting the exact same character she had been drawing in secret. The coincidence felt like a crack in glass that let light in and brought the smell of wet paint and school dust into a life that had been airtight for too long. It made Isabella question whether identity was a suit you were born into or a shape you could redraft. In the days that followed, the identical girl appeared like a running echo in different corners of the school. Her name was Sofia. She had a scar on her knuckle from a summer job she never explained, sneakers scuffed with city grit, and a laugh that was softer than her stare. Sofia did not move in the same orbit as Isabella. She took buses that smelled of oil and cheap perfume, ate lunch in a courtyard that smelled of garlic and fried plantain, and carried a worn sketchbook stuffed with clippings and bus tickets. The contrast stung. Isabella felt her world split. Two faces, two smells, two histories. In class, the teacher, Miss Carter, called roll, and the two Isabellas collided in silence. A mirror moment that drew whispers. Daniel, who sat a row behind and had always been polite to everyone, blinked as if his eyes had betrayed him. Priya, who doodled in the margins of her notebook, nudged Naomi, the tutor, and mouthed the word twin. The auditorium felt smaller, the stage lights harsher, as if the size of a life could be measured in the volume of a whisper. No one asked how two girls could match like puzzle pieces ripped from different boxes. People cataloged what they could see and filed it away. The humiliation arrived on a Tuesday. A math test that should have been routine was distributed with the soft slide of paper and a pile of sighs. Isabella watched the clock as if time were a teacher she needed permission from. When the papers came back, there was a red zero like a small sun on the top corner. A hand at the back of the room slapped a desk. Someone else snorted. "She has everything and she still gets a zero," Priya whispered to Daniel with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. The zeros on the class board became a chorus. At home, the email notification that opened Marcus' eyes at the dinner table was a public reading. "Isabella," he said, folding the device like bad news. His fingers left a ring of tension on the leather chair. "This is unacceptable." Elena looked up from a plate of roasted vegetables, her expression polished, the twinkle lights from the mantel making her choker glitter. "We paid for the best," she said, meaning the tutors, the programs, and the reputation. There was a silence like the one between heartbeats. Isabella felt heat in her ears, like the warmth of furnace vents that pretended to be attention. She tried to explain, to point to the sketches tucked into her backpack, but her words scattered like leaves. The confrontation in the living room became a small trial. "You know what this looks like," Marcus said, voice low and contained, as if economics could govern disappointment. "You know what our name does in cities. You cannot let another zero define that." "It is not about the zero," Isabella tried. "It is not about what people will say." "Then what is it about?" Elena cut in, hands folding the napkin on her lap with an exactness that made Isabella think of inventories. "Why are you not trying harder?" The exchange expanded into more than a conversation. It became an interrogation of ambitions, a census of feelings. Isabella replied with bursts. "I do try. I go to class, I meet with Naomi, I sit in the library." Marcus answered with accusations. Elena responded with facts about schedules and tutors. Daniel called later that night, his voice a small anchor through her door. "Do not let them drown out what you like," he said simply. Priya texted a string of emojis that meant empathy. The backstory that had been tucked inside Isabella rested like a small suitcase on a closet floor. It held the memory of a father who rehearsed pride, and a mother who rehearsed praise, of a house full of objects and empty of rehearsal for mistakes. It was near 900 characters of private history, late nights drawing under a lamp while the staff polished silver downstairs, summer tutors teaching formulas, holiday dinners where conversations were transactions, and the small joy of sketching a character who never had to fit into a profile. That backstory explained why Isabella felt both privileged and stranded, why meeting Sofia was less coincidence and more a mirror showing what life could be with different edges. Not far from the marble hallways of privilege, there was another kind of certainty. The school groundskeeper, Mr. Ramos. He had lived at the school for almost 30 years, polishing brass knobs and repairing 1,000 things no one noticed. He smelled of earth and lemon oil, his palms always carrying grit like a proof of work. He had watched children grow into adults and families rise and recede like tides. He noticed pockets of students that administration missed, the discarded sketches, the lonely benches, the way certain names carried weight and others carried silence. One afternoon, he found Isabella and Sofia on opposite sides of the art room courtyard, their sketchbooks open, faces bent. He did not remark on their similarity at first. He observed the way Isabella drew with the stiff hand of someone taught to hide mistakes, and the way Sofia shaded as if each line had a story. The first interaction was small. "You two keep the same weather in your books," he said, voice slow like a door easing open. Isabella jumped. Sofia looked up with paint across her cheek. Mr. Ramos carried a tea thermos that smelled faintly of ginger. He had hands that looked like the hands of someone who had turned soil and mended fences, rather than opened bank accounts. The people who swept the floors often knew how to read the lines others left behind. The revelation came the way most truths do, in a sentence both ordinary and seismic. Mr. Ramos sat on a bench, the wood creaking under him, and asked Isabella to see Sofia's drawing. He spread both sketchbooks out, his fingers tracing edges with a familiarity that was almost reverent. "You both map the same town," he said. "Different streets, same river." His manner was calm, the sort of soft cadence that did not demand drama. "Maps are practice," he added, looking at Isabella. "A map needs a route, a name for a path, a step that tells you where to start. That simple phrase lodged itself in Isabella. Mr. Ramos unfolded a simple method he called steps, not stairs. He showed how to take a problem apart into tiny parts, how to color one shade at a time instead of trying to paint a masterpiece at once, how to mark failures as markers on a map rather than dead ends. He explained with the tactile humility of someone used to mending things. When you fix a fence, you do not replace the whole thing. You find the broken slat and nail it back. Learning is the same. The explanation belonged to him, but it sounded like a translation of something she had been trying to say. The lesson arrived with his hands, with the smell of lemon oil, with a scrapped knee that looked like a story. "What do you mean, steps not stairs?" Isabella asked, turning the paper so light glinted off the pencil marks. "How do you even start?" Sofia asked, her voice half challenge, half plea. "Start where it is smallest," Mr. Ramos said. "Pick one corner, fix one habit, draw one line." "But what if one line is wrong?" Isabella pressed. "Then you erase," Mr. Ramos replied. "Then you try another line. Erasing is allowed." "It never felt allowed at home," Isabella admitted. "There are expectations," Sofia said, eyes on Isabella. "Expectations are heavy," Mr. Ramos said. "Lighten them with steps." "Can you show us a step now?" Sofia asked, leaning in. "Show us how to fix the first slat," Isabella said, a little breathless. "Okay," Mr. Ramos smiled and took a pencil like a carpenter would take a chisel. "First, pick a question you can answer in a sentence," he said. "Second, choose one thing to change for 1 week. Third, write what happened. Fourth, repeat the attempt and adjust." He wrote the 4 steps with a coal-black marker on a scrap of cardboard and handed it to them. "This is not schooling fancy," he said. "This is a map you can fold and carry. If you have felt like you tried everything and still hit the same wall, you are not alone. Share in the comments where you come from and tell us one simple thing a person without titles taught you. Start your comment with your city so others can see how far wisdom travels. Your stories remind us that mentors can arrive in unexpected uniforms and that small steps often outlast grand gestures. The community here grows when you add one line of truth. Your comment may help someone reading tonight who thinks they have to wait for permission to change. Now back to Isabella, who held the cardboard map like a talisman and decided to test the first step. The experiment began as all good practices do, clumsy and hopeful. Isabella chose one small question. She could answer in a sentence. "Can I improve my score on the next quiz by changing how I approach one problem a day?" became the map. The first change was mechanical. She would spend 15 minutes at noon doing only one type of math problem, then write a single line about what went well. The room smelled of cafeteria steam and dust. The pencil felt foreign between fingers used to fountain pens. The initial attempts were messy. Pages filled with erased numbers, a smudged thumb, coffee ring stains that looked like moons. But there were signs. A correct step that had been wrong before, a smile from Naomi when she read the notebook, a nod from Daniel in the hall that felt like a vote. The first quiz after the routine was not triumphant. It was a 70, a number that made her parents raise eyebrows, and Miss Carter unbutton her guard. But for Isabella, it was a sunrise. She felt the grain of the paper differently, as if texture were proof of change. Sofia's shading grew steadier too. The two of them started comparing marginal notes like cartographers sharing secret coordinates. The practice needed to be social to stick. Isabella started a small circle during free period. She invited Daniel, Priya, Naomi, and a few others who had shown curiosity. They met at a long table near the art room, where the light from the courtyard came in, smells of jasmine and paint mixing. The dialogue in those sessions lengthened into the kind of back and forth that changes people. "I tried the step and failed," Priya said first, voice type. "What did you learn?" "That flipping cards fast makes me panic," Priya replied. "Then practice slow," Mr. Ramos suggested when he dropped by, putting a thermos of ginger tea on the table. "Slow is how you find the rhythm," Naomi said, showing a notebook with tallies. Daniel offered a tip about time blocking. Sofia suggested visual cues. A rhythm emerged of sharing one small mistake, naming it, testing a tiny correction, and logging it. The room acquired the smell of paper and warm tea, and the sound of chairs scraping as people leaned in. The routine yielded tens of tiny wins: a solved problem, a clear explanation, a hand raised that did not tremble. Miss Carter noticed the change and commented in a faculty email about a new study group. The word spread, and slowly, measured by small increments, a culture shifted. Success provoked old architectures to creak. Marcus struggled to accept the pace. "Why are you settling for slow?" he asked one evening, his voice carrying a blend of urgency and fear. "Because slow lasts," Isabella answered. "Because a 70 now is a step toward an 80 next month." "We invested in instant results," Marcus said, as if investments could be swapped for patience. Mr. Ramos confronted him with a quiet authority that came from years of fixing things. "You cannot expedite growth by throwing money at it," he said. "You can only create weight that drowns curiosity." Marcus's retort was financial logic. Mr. Ramos replied with the slow logic of repair. Naomi joined with charts showing progress. Priya showed her margin notes to Elena, who read them like a ledger and unexpectedly softened. "Maybe the map matters more than the stamp of approval," Elena said one night, admitting that recognition could be internal. The community around Isabella shifted from gossip to support. More names became anchors. Daniel offered steady humor. Priya offered brave experiments. Naomi offered structure. Miss Carter offered permission. Sofia offered mirrored persistence. And Mr. Ramos offered the practice phrase that became a mantra: steps, not stairs. They were 8 people who rotated between roles of critic and cheerleader in a way that made Isabella breathe easier. The transformation did not come as a single lightning strike. It came as a succession of small inventions. Isabella taught Sofia a technique for breaking down essay prompts into 3 parts. Sofia taught Isabella how to mix watercolors for subtle skin tones and how to track progress by color. Daniel taught a time test that shaved minutes off panic. Priya designed tiny rewards for small wins. Naomi showed them how to convert mistakes into a checklist. Miss Carter introduced a class exercise where students taught each other one small thing. The school hallway, once a corridor of whispers, gathered sound and laughter. Isabella began to volunteer to tutor younger students in the art room during free periods. She would set a timer for 15 minutes and show just one simple trick, then ask the student to teach it back. The act of explaining shifted her relationship to knowledge. She was no longer the passive recipient of high expectations, but an agent of incremental change. Her grades climbed, not dramatically, but steadily. Her confidence, once brittle, developed a grain of solidity. At a minor awards night, she did not take the stage with a trophy, but with a portfolio. Parents clapped because they were expected to clap, but there was also real applause from peers who had watched her draw a different map of her life. Then came the moment that tested whether a personal change could ripple outward. A neighborhood community center asked the school for volunteers to run a creative workshop for children from diverse backgrounds. Isabella proposed a program of small steps. Each week, a child would learn one practical technique and share what they had tried. Miss Carter supported the idea. Naomi organized materials. Daniel and Priya committed to lead activities. Sofia joined without hesitation, and Mr. Ramos offered to bring tools and stories. Marcus, who had seen the shifts in Isabella, reluctantly agreed to fund a pilot. The program started in a room that smelled of chalk and lemon cleaning solution, with children seated in mismatched chairs. Isabella demonstrated the one thing a week method. At first, the kids were skeptical. Then a boy named Mateo painted a tree using one technique he had practiced for 7 minutes and jumped up with a shout. A girl named Aisha taught the group a rhythm she had invented for memorizing spelling words. The workshop grew into a schedule of small achievements that fed into bigger changes. The school's reputation for elite accomplishment met a grassroots project that showed learning could be redistributed. The community felt a subtle, collective exhale. People began to speak differently about failure. The conflict that followed was not external so much as a test of legitimacy. Some parents asked if the program was diluting standards, if small steps were enough. An article in a local paper questioned whether the children were being coddled. Mr. Ramos was quoted for his decades of repair wisdom, and the quote went viral in local circles for its humble clarity. The critics expected a collapse. What they saw instead was sustained progress. Students who had never asked for help now did. Daniel, who had been reticent about public recognition, accepted an invitation to speak about peer coaching. Priya started a podcast where she interviewed someone who had taught her a simple trick that changed a result. Naomi organized a short training for tutors in the method. Miss Carter recommended the routine to other schools in the district. Marcus, watching the slow accretion of results, realized his initial discomfort had come from fear of appearing insufficient as a provider. He announced a scholarship cycle inspired by the program aimed at students who showed commitment to incremental practice rather than only instant top scores. Consolidation happened in the rhythm of repeated small acts. Isabella became a fixture in the art room and the workshop. She named the method she and Sofia used, map steps, not leaps. The phrase echoed. She taught Daniel how to break essays into argument blocks. She helped Priya structure her study sessions with index cards. Sofia opened a small street art collective that invited neighborhood youth to paint murals based on their personal maps. Naomi kept track of the data, looking at averages and standard deviations like a patient scientist. Miss Carter wrote a recommendation for a district grant. Mr. Ramos, who never sought credit, watched students paste their progress charts on the art room wall like a constellation of small suns. Names multiplied as collaborators and witnesses. Mateo, Aisha, Daniel, Priya, Naomi, Miss Carter, Mr. Ramos, Sofia. Their interactions had texture. The scent of tea, the scratch of pencil, the warmth of a hand that steadied another during a shaky illustration, the hum of a copier that printed practice sheets, the clatter of cups in a shared kitchen. The school schedule changed slightly to accommodate peer-led labs. Isabella helped design a syllabus for micro-skills and delivered a brief talk at a faculty meeting, not to boast but to share a practice. 1 month after the program started, the change was visible. In the workshop rose, with 20 children regularly showing up, the room smelling of pasted paper and markers. Isabella kept a notebook of reflections, and the first chapter was a short, honest entry about feeling less alone. Her grades had ticked upward in ways that Miss Carter smiled. Parents in the pilot group sent emails thanking the staff for focusing on real habits. The scholarship fund had 1 application, and the committee chose a recipient whose essay described a single step that changed a family's routine. The local paper ran a human interest piece that highlighted Mr. Ramos's role and included a photograph of him sitting between Isabella and Sofia, the 3 of them smiling with paint flecks on their sleeves. At a community dinner, some of the younger kids performed a short skit about maps and steps, and the laughter felt like sound of stitches being sewn into place. The immediate effect was not wealth redistribution, but a redistribution of attention. Where there had been whispers about failures, there were now conversations about process. 3 months in, the program had established patterns. The workshop became a standing after-school option, and curriculum teams incorporated micro-practice into semester plans. Isabella had a routine: 1 focused practice at noon, a short reflection in the evening, and peer teaching twice a week. Her average rose again, small but steady, and teachers noted a difference in participation. Sofia had organized a pop-up exhibit where neighborhood art met school portfolios and local residents turned out in larger numbers than expected, clapping for kids who had learned to name one tiny technique and then teach it. The scholarship Marcus funded received multiple applicants, and the school partnered with a community center to expand the pilot. Naomi presented preliminary results to a district meeting showing that incremental practice improved retention and lowered stress. Critics who had expected a fad watched enrollment increase and attendance stabilize. More important was a human measure. Students who once avoided speaking now coached their peers. The program had become a scaffold, not a spectacle. The phrase "steps, not stairs" appeared on hand-lettered posters in the hallways and on the back of workshop t-shirts. The repetition of the phrase itself became a comfort, a shared vocabulary for perseverance. At 6 months, the legacy was clearer and more concrete. The workshop had expanded to 3 weekly sessions, and a curriculum packet based on the method was ready for distribution. Isabella had become a peer mentor coordinator, spending afternoons training others in how to lead a 15-minute practice. Sofia's mural project covered one side of the community center, a flow of color that locals used as backdrop for family photos. The scholarship now supported 2 students, and the application process brought in essays that revealed changes in home routines and attitudes about learning. Marcus convened a donors meeting and proposed funding for materials and stipends for peer leaders, acknowledging publicly that his initial impatience had been replaced by respect for the slow architecture of practice. Miss Carter secured a modest grant to pilot the syllabus in neighboring schools. Mr. Ramos, who preferred to keep his name out of the spotlight, accepted an invitation to speak at a small education forum where his remarks were recorded and shared in community networks. The program improved attendance, increased measured confidence, and, perhaps most meaningfully, created a model other schools began to ask about. Children who had once been silent now cited their small steps when asked about achievement. The town, which had previously measured success by trophies and headlines, began to count the quiet increments of progress. In the end, Isabella was no longer defined by zeros or by the isolation of a name. She was recognized as someone who learned, taught, and built spaces where others could attempt without shame. The mentor phrase became a chorus. Steps, not stairs. A sentence that threaded small decisions into larger lives. The practical consequence was visible. A pilot turned into a program. Scholarships opened doors. Murals brightened community walls. And a small method spread across institutions. The lesson was simple and stubborn. Failure is not final when you have a map and a handful of people willing to walk the steps with you. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear that small steps matter. If you want more stories about people who found a way forward in unexpected places, subscribe and join the community. The last line of Isabella's sketchbook read like a promise. The map matters more than the name. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.